Today you join me with the first ever Aston Martin on this channel, a 2019 Aston Martin Vantage. To tell you the truth, I don't really have much experience with this brand. In fact, the only other Aston I ever drove was the Rapide, and it only lasted 15 minutes.
Not too loud.
So, I will not try to review this car judging it on whether or not it feels like an Aston should, but instead, I want to answer a very simple question. Should you pick one of these over a Porsche 911? And if so, why? But before we dive into the car, let's just take a step back and analyze the difference between these two brands. Both of these brands have a very strong heritage in motorsports. Aston Martin has a much longer history than Porsche, 110 years versus 75. But where I think the two brands differ the most are in their ownership histories. Porsche is the younger company, but it has been under the ownership of the Porsche family since the inception of the brand. But Aston Martin, on the other hand, has been bought and sold 9 times, from privately owned to the Ford era, to the Mercedes partnership, and now finally publicly listed on the London Stock Exchange. The existence of Aston Martin always seems to be hanging on a thread. So, how can Aston Martin possibly make a car better than the 911? Well, maybe having change is not always bad. Take James Bond as an example. Do you think it would still be cool if Sean Connery continued to play the role of 007 until the 2010s? Probably not. Instead, there has been 8 actors that played the role of James Bond since Dr. No in 1962. And I think Daniel Craig is the best of them all. I'm sorry if you disagree. So maybe this newish Aston Vantage has a fighting chance over the old school 911. Or maybe the 911's conventional design offers such cohesiveness and perfectionism that is just too hard to compete with. Well, let's try to find out. Alright, so let's start with the exterior of this car. There's no denying that this is a good looking car. It looks great. Look at it. And it has a lot of road presence. When I drive this car outside, I can definitely tell that there are lots of eyes locked onto this car. But is it a masterpiece? Well, not so sure. For me, I think the previous gen Aston Martin Vantage is probably a design masterpiece, but this is good looking, but not the best. Let's move on to the engine. As you'll see that this door swivels up and it doesn't use a ratcheting system, so the door stays in place where you leave it, which is just, that makes this car that much more special. This engine is a Mercedes AMG engine. It's a twin turbo V8. They call this the M177, if I'm not mistaken. A 4-liter hot V configuration. That means the 2 turbos are sitting in between the 2 banks of cylinders for reduced turbo lag and good response. It's also sitting as far back as possible behind the front axle, which makes this a front mid-engined layout. Just look at how much space the intake takes up. That is a lot of space. This engine puts out 510 horsepower, which is more than enough, as you'll see once we start driving. And it's probably one of my favorite features of this car. However, there is one downside of this engine, which I will be talking about once we start driving. Next, we move on to the interior, which, just look at it. It just feels special in here. Now, I have to say, even though they share quite a lot of infrastructure with the modern Mercedes, if you're someone who's never driven a modern Mercedes, you step into this, you're gonna feel like, wow, this thing looks great. And compared to a Porsche, this just feels handcrafted. Just look at the door cards for a second. Look at the details. Look at how they decide to do the stitching patterns and all that. Look at this stitching. Look at this yellow stitching. If you just look at it, you can tell that some of the stitching is not exactly in a straight line, but that's okay. It adds to the charm. It gives you this handcrafted feeling. And the leather in this car, the leather is so much nicer than the leather in Porsches. This is just the softest leather. It's a soft grain. When you put your arm on this armrest, it's like caressing the thighs of a young lady. It's so soft. And it smells good. It doesn't smell like, some new cars smell like plastic, but this doesn't. This just smells like leather, old school leather. It's a very special feeling interior. If you've ever sat in a DB11, that feels even more special, but I'll take this for now. Just look at some of these intricate details, like the door handle. This, I guess you could call it a hammerhead shark design. How cool is that? There's this, the light dimmer, which you have to press first to let it pop out, and then you can rotate it, and you push it back in. Small details like these, I like. We should get going because I'm not gonna judge the car based on how it looks and how the interior feels, even though I do like this interior. I'm going to judge this car based on how it drives. So, let's get driving. All right. Put the phone away as usual. Start the car up. Foot on the brake. Start. Seat scoots forward. This car has comfort access, so it feels like this could be a luxury car, right? A really nice interior, comfort access. Gives you the vibe of a luxury car, of a Grand Tour. Low fuel. Alright. But let's see. How does it drive? Immediately when I put it into drive, there is no gear shift. Let's get rid of that. And you can feel this car is very torquey. Even just going from a standstill, you let go, it just lurches forward. Almost a little bit too much. But this car is paired with a 8-speed ZF transmission, which is used in almost all modern cars. And that might take away from the character of the car, because I just feel like every car is using this. Why does this special Aston Martin sports car need to use it as well? Well, that's just because of their partnership with Mercedes. They didn't really have a chance. But maybe they could have used the DCT. As I know, because I think the AMG GT uses a DCT, right? It would be very interesting to compare this with the AMG GT, but I don't have access to one of those. So in this video, like I said, I will be trying to answer the question, should you get one of these instead of a 911. Oh, one more thing I like about this car is you can actually completely turn off the screen by pressing this button, and it's off. Nothing there to distract you. Even this stock is from Mercedes. Sunday morning, no traffic. Okay, once we get going, I want to talk about the steering first. These modern electronically assisted steering, they're getting very good. Very good in terms of precision and resolution. What I mean by resolution is even the tiniest movements, you can feel the car steering. As small as this, I can feel the car moving. If you compare this to cars from the 90s or even the early 2000s, there would be a lot of free play on the center. But this car feels tight. And this is one of the main themes of this car that I notice is this car feels very tight. The steering is super tight, and actually the ratio is, I have a feeling it's a very quick ratio because you can maneuver this car with the smallest movements, almost Ferrari-esque from what I've been told. And the tightness continues to the powertrain. I feel like there's no slack in this powertrain. However, in this current mode, the standard mode, it says S, which actually stands for sport. But what it really means is emissions testing mode. So this mode feels very soggy. So let's get out of this mode. Let's go to Sport Plus. And now you can feel the throttle sensitivity is just where I want it to be. You prod it and it goes. And like I said, this powertrain feels very tight. Zero slack, instant. I know you can't really feel that, but I just tap it and it goes. Look at that. Yeah, of course it's a turbocharged engine, but I feel like this car, you can drive it two ways, okay? You can drive it below 3,000 RPM or over 3,000 RPM. Yesterday, when I was driving this car, I drove this car to the mall, and I kept it below 3,000 the whole time. And below 3,000, it doesn't feel like a turbocharged V8. Apart from the muted sound, it doesn't. There's instant throttle response. It just feels like a muscle car. Really good throttle response. Good instant torque. Good. Just feels NA, basically. But once you start to build boost, this thing becomes a beast, and it pulls all the way to redline. Unlike some of the turbocharged cars where you get most of your torque in the mid-range, this feels more motorsport. It keeps on pulling all the way to redline. And the way that it delivers the power is very progressive. It doesn't suddenly just give you a gush of torque. It doesn't. It slowly builds up. But it is also a lot of torque. Don't get me wrong. This car is actually a torque monster. But it doesn't catch you off guard, which makes it kind of easy to drive. I'll have to demonstrate this soon. But I want to talk about the suspension next. The suspension on this car, I mentioned earlier, this car gives you the vibe of a Grand Tourer. But the suspension feels like a sports car suspension. Feels very stiff. And to me, maybe I'm biased, but I feel like the damping on a Porsche is just that much more sophisticated. On this, it seems a little bit too crashy, and in the sport mode, the standard mode, I can feel quite a lot of body motion, so it doesn't feel completely composed, but it also feels crashy at the same time. And so let's try putting it in Sport Plus, where it just stiffens up a little bit more, but maybe the body control is slightly better, but it's also just as crashy as before. But I'm willing to have a slightly better body control in this setting. So let's just keep both of the settings in Sport Plus for this test drive. Now when you start pushing this engine, let's start shifting manually. 6th gear. So like I said, below 3,000 feels like a normally aspirated low torque V8, lazy V8 with oobs of torque. Let's get this U-turn. Downshift, downshift. Not as good as a dual clutch, not much character. I think this car would be much more fun if it had a dual clutch. It just gives it that much more drama and mechanical feeling. But the ZF is a pretty good unit, just lacks drama. Shift, shift. But once you get past 3,000, you start building boost. Whoa. This thing becomes a beast. Wow. It just keeps on going like a freight train. Shift down a third. Let's shift down a second. 5,000. Holy crap. These brakes, they're pretty good. But in terms of feel, they don't provide much feel. And speaking of feel, this car lacks feel, which I feel like there's a conflicting personality with this car. Part of this car feels like a luxury Grand Tour, and another part of this car just wants to be a sports car, and the two of them don't quite add up. But it doesn't make this a bad car, it just feels different. It feels different to a Porsche. Maybe I'm just too biased, I've been driving too many Porsches. But once you start driving them, every car just cannot compete. What I'm trying to demonstrate here is the traction control. This traction control does a good job at saving you, but it does so very abruptly. Yesterday when I was testing the traction control, it just slammed on the brakes and the car really lost balance. But it did prevent me from getting too much angle. It prevented me from spinning out, but the way it does it is not so delicate. Let me try to demonstrate at the next U-turn right here of the traction control. Now before we get to the U-turn, I want to talk about the road noise. The road noise on this car is significant. You hear a lot of the road. It's quite loud, and a lot of it is coming from the tires and the wheels, and that's one other thing that I want to talk about. Is it a Grand Tour or is it a sports car? I don't know. See, put the power down, traction control doing its thing. Oops, I didn't get to demonstrate it. I was too late on the power. Let's try to do it here. So let's try to provoke the rear end by slamming on the throttle right now. See, it just puts on the brakes and the car just it's not a very comfortable feeling. So let's turn it off. How do you turn it off? Well, there is the traction control button right here. You have to hold it 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 or 5 seconds. Then you have track mode. But track mode still interferes with you. So Turn it again. You press it one more time. And now it's completely off. Now before we start testing the dynamics of this car, I want to talk about the sound. The sound of this engine. It's not, it doesn't sound exotic. It sounds, I hate to say this, but it sounds artificial. From the rumbling to the pops don't feel genuine. The pops feel engineered, and they engineered it badly as well. It just pops like something's broken. Yep, now the rear is free. No traction control doing its thing, no interference from traction control, and now I can feel the fluidity of the back end of this car. And if you are very careful with your throttle input, this car has a very balanced rear end. But if you're not careful, because of all that torque, this car can be very twitchy. The rear end can completely overpower the front end, and you just snap oversteer like that. You gotta be considerate when you're getting on the power, trying to do a power slide. Please go left. Thank you, because I'm going right. Now let's do a second gear. You hear that pop? Not very pleasant. Sounds like something's broken. See? It can be a bit twitchy. You have to catch it on time as well, which I'm not so good at it yet. But it's so easy to send this thing sideways with your right foot. And I can understand why my friend is completely terrified of this car. He's owned this car for 3 years and he's barely driven it because he's just so scared of it. It's a very deceiving car if you think about it. You step in, it feels like a luxury car, the seat moves back for you, you start the engine, it moves forward, you're comfortable, smells good, the sound system is pretty decent. You're surrounded by all this nice leather, and you put your foot down and the car wants to kill you. Yeah. I kind of like this car. I like it not as a sports car, but it's dramatic. It's fun. So easy to drive like a dick. All right, let's find a set of corners and try to judge what this car feels like cornering. I already know what it feels like cornering because I've been driving this car quite a bit, but I want to share with you my thoughts. On the Sky Bridge we go. The Sky Bridge. So let's try to do a clean line. Let's not try to provoke oversteer here because it's very dangerous. It's slightly damp and yeah, don't want to crash. So let's do third gear and just push it in slightly, slowly start pushing. The front end started to let loose, but I don't think that's the car's fault. I think it's the expansion joints on this bridge. They usually, if it's damp, they cause the car to understeer. But I feel like the body control is pretty good in this car. You can feel it's really well balanced, and that's probably because the engine is so far back. But I don't get the same kind of mid-corner confidence as when I'm in a Porsche. I'm sorry I keep saying Porsche, but this is a comparison to a 911, so I have to compare it to Porsche. And I I don't feel confident cornering this car fast. It's the lack of feedback. Even though the chassis is good, the lack of feedback. Oh, it's just so much fun to do that. The lack of feedback makes this car a little bit scary driving near the limit. Maybe I'm just not a good enough driver. Fourth gear. Oh my god, this thing is so powerful. Third gear, it even wants to come out sideways. Jeez. No, I sort of did that on purpose. But it just shows you how much torque this thing has. I haven't tried taking it to red line yet, so let's give that a try. Let's give that a try. No cars behind. I don't know how to do launch control, and I don't want to do launch control because it's not my car. So let's just wait. Put it in first. And remember, I'm low on fuel, but yeah, let's go. Whoa. Shit. This thing is fast. Whoa. Even in fourth gear, it was trying to step out. Oh, this engine. Jesus. This engine is just... it's a masterpiece. Oh my god, this torque. Well done, Mercedes. Okay, let's go back. I think I've already covered most of what I need to say. So let's go back. Wow. This engine is amazing. I don't like the sound, but this engine. Maybe with a free-flowing exhaust, this thing would be a monster. Okay, let's chill out, put it back in drive. No, I don't want track mode. Okay, put it into sport, suspension into sport, and let's conclude. So, engine, great. Steering, very sharp, very quick, very precise, but no feel, as expected. Brakes, very powerful, but lacking feel. You see the theme here? Good performance, but no feel. And the suspension could be more comfortable, I think. I think this car would probably benefit from a more comfortable suspension. I don't think it needs to be this aggressive. The handling, I can tell the chassis is great, but on the limit handling, I'm not too confident. That's probably because I'm on the public roads. If I drive this on the test track, I'd probably be more tempted to just drift this thing instead of trying to do a fast lap time. Just because I want to have fun with this engine. This engine is so much fun. And so, would I pick one of these over a 911? Well, it depends on the kind of car that you want to buy. If you want something that has a lot of road presence, that gets you noticed, if you want a car that has a special feeling interior, that feels handcrafted and well designed, and if you want something that has a lot of drama when you're driving, this is the car for you. You don't need to pick a very sanitized and slightly boring 911. But if you want a car that's just near perfect in every way, that's capable in setting very fast lap times, and that you feel confident in driving fast, a car that has near perfect inputs, then you still have to get a 911. For me, which would I pick? Well, if I had the money, I would like to have both. But for me, you probably guessed it, I still prefer to have a 911. And it's really hard to explain it, but once you've driven a Porsche, once you've owned one of those cars, there really is nothing else quite like it. On paper, it seems really boring. Come on, it's 6 cylinders, engines in the back. They've been doing this for 50 years. 50 plus years. I don't know. Seems like a boring car, but when you drive it, there's just something magical about them. It makes cars like this, a car that seems very exotic, a car that's beautifully built and drives great. They make cars like this just feel off. That's all. That's the only way I can put it. I try to think of other words, but no, it makes excellent cars feel off. That's what 911s make you feel once you start driving them. Anyway, that is my conclusion of this car. And if you disagree, that's okay. But let me know what you think, okay? So leave a comment. And thank you for watching. Oh, by the way, in my next video, please stay tuned, because in my next video, I will be reviewing the GT4 RS. The same car that I revealed, not reviewed, but revealed in my video a few weeks ago. So stay tuned and thanks for watching. Bye guys.